I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. My name is Stacy Cochran, and I am the organizer for the Raleigh Right to Publish group. I'm absolutely thrilled to have Kevin Watson with us. Kevin is the founder and senior editor at Press 53. The format for these events, for you guys who have been here before, you know, I start with a few kind of canned questions, and then we'll open it up to questions from anybody here that you have for Kevin tonight. So tell us a little bit about the history of Press 53.
Well, Press 53 started out as a means of not going crazy. I was a writer, am a writer, short story writer, had been published and won a couple of awards, and after I lost my day job working for U.S. Airways, after 9/11, you know, a lot of things happened and they were cutting back, and I lost my job in 2004. I started looking for ways to maintain my sanity. So I was doing some workshops, and then I thought, you know, I really enjoy sharing writing with people, and I had edited a short fiction anthology in 2001 for a New York City-based arts foundation and enjoyed that process. I enjoyed reading, finding stories I like, publishing them and sharing those with people, other readers, and finding readers who agreed with me that, yeah, this is good stuff. So I like the process of not just finding the stories, but designing the book and laying out the book and imagining the cover. So I started teaching myself book cover design, took some art classes, how to lay out a book, bought a program where you could do that, and basically started there. Word got out pretty quickly that what I was doing. I touched base with a couple people I published in the Silver Rose anthology. One of them, Doug Frelke, who actually lives here in Raleigh. Fantastic writer. At the time I met him, he was at Harvard and had moved back to Raleigh to find work as a teacher. And we were having dinner one night, and he said, I've got this collection of short stories that's going into its third printing, but I'd rather work with you. Again, I had such a good experience. Would you be interested? And when I started Press 53, I thought it would just be a local press, that we would just do something in Winston-Salem, where I live, try to find some local writers, publish a book or two a year. And then when Doug offered me this collection of stories that I had read and I loved, I thought, well, maybe we could branch out a little more to Raleigh, maybe make it a regional, I could be a regional thing. And then I got another email from a gentleman I published in the Silver Rose called Tom, his name's Tom Sheehan, and he lives in Saugus, Massachusetts, and said, I've got this collection of short stories that nobody seems to want, would you be interested? And then I thought, well, maybe I could just be an East Coast publisher. And then somebody else contacted me. Pretty soon I was getting all these submissions from short story writers who had these wonderful collections of award-winning short stories that nobody seemed to want to publish. So I got busy very, very quickly on this. That's how it got started, basically.
Let's talk a little bit about your motivation to start the press. That's a little bit of the history from Milestone's perspective. But what was really kind of driving you to want to start a press? You lost your job, it sounds like, after 9/11, is that right?
Right. Yeah, and I think what drove me...
So you said, I'm going to get rich by going into publishing.
Yeah, well, still waiting for that to happen. In a former life, I was a songwriter in Nashville for 10 years. I spent 10 years there with my younger brother, who's here with me tonight. And I remember when Michael Johnson came out with his CD called Wings, and it was some of the best country music I'd heard in a long time. And I think I bought and gave away 24 of those CDs to people because I just love sharing. And I like being around writers. I like being around other artists. So my motivation in starting Press 53 was the opportunity to find work that I liked and share it with other people. So that was kind of the sanity part of it, is that I wanted to get more involved, become more involved, I knew that if I liked something, that I was sure there were thousands of other people out there. I'm still convinced of this, that I'm such an average guy, that there are thousands and thousands of people out there who would agree with me if they were aware of it. So that's the challenge, is finding the writing I love and publishing it, which is why I don't publish for the marketplace. I don't think about, is there a market for this book? Is there a market for short stories? I mean, my gosh, short stories are starting to come back now. They're gaining more recognition. And it's always been my belief that they'll come back into favor like they were back in the 40s and 50s, which seems to be the case now.
So who were some of your first authors, and how did you acquire the rights to publish their books? Were these people that you knew? Talk about that process a little bit.
Yeah, well, I mentioned that Doug had moved from Harvard down to Raleigh, and I was doing some workshops in Winston-Salem called Saturday Retreats for Writers. And get together once a month on a Saturday, and I'd bring a writer in from somewhere, and we'd do a whole day's worth of workshops, and we'd limit it to 10 people who could take this class. And Doug came in to do one on the art of revision. He's a master at revision. So when I told Doug, just in kind of confidence, that I was going to start this little press, word got out pretty quickly. So it shows you can't trust writers at all. You keep your mouth shut. But that was a good thing, because pretty soon, I mean, word got out, and I had another friend of mine, Cheryl Monks, who I graduated Salem. I went to Salem College, the oldest all-women's college in America. So I'm a very proud Salem sister. Earned my sisterhood because I went to school every day with these 20-something women who just kicked my butt. So I wear my sisterhood proudly. But Cheryl was a graduate of Salem College and an award-winning short story writer, and she shared my ambition for sharing stories. And she came on board. She actually asked me if there was something she could do to help out. And I said, well, I've got all these manuscripts, and I really need a good proofreader, a good editor to look them over, and because I'm getting busy. And one thing led to another, and we partnered up. I actually brought her on as a partner shortly thereafter. So in January of '06, we formed our partnership at that point. And we started getting submissions, I mean, literally by February. I opened the press in October, and by February we were getting submissions from all over the world. Every continent but Antarctica. We're still waiting on that. And I know there's some writers in Antarctica, but just waiting. But
with a great, Antarctic thriller or something,
That's right.
So how it sounds like you were able to immediately have writers be aware of the press. How did you market the early books? What are some of the ways that you were marketing the press to get that name recognition out there?
Well, it shows you the power of the internet, number one, that we just had to put it out there. And it's almost like The Secret. You all seen The Secret? It doesn't work with the lottery like they say, because I've been trying that. But really, if you put it out there, if you have the energy and you put it out there, and it's something you truly believe in, and something you are putting your heart and soul into, I think people pick up on that. There's some kind of energy out there. All we had to do is basically say, yeah, we've started this little publishing company, and because Cheryl knew people, because she was a writer, I knew people because I was a writer, and I'd been published different places, that word got out via the internet very, very quickly. So we were getting, I know before we published our first poetry collection, we just kind of put it out there that we were looking for poetry, and we had over 100 submissions, poetry submissions in a week from all over the world. So it was, the internet's basically the marketing tool we use. It's a great way for people when they like something. It's the new word of mouth. It's just an extension of word of mouth.
So what role has the independent bookseller played in Press 53's growth?
Well, if it weren't for the independent bookseller, our books wouldn't even be out there where people could walk in and buy it. The big block bookstores aren't interested basically in what the small presses are doing. They don't seem to get it. And the independent bookstores like Quail Ridge, which I love Quail Ridge, this is where you'll find the real book people, the people who actually read. I was at a bookstore recently with one of our authors, and he talked to the lady who was the manager of one of these big block stores, and he told me that he went up to her and said something, and she says, "Well, I don't have time to read. I don't read books." So that kind of tells you something, you know. But when you walk into an independent store like this, you'll find books that are tagged, you know, that so-and-so who works here recommends this book, so-and-so actually read this book. So that's the advantage. When you look around in this store, if there are any aspiring authors here, I'm absolutely blown away when I walk into a store like this and see thousands of books on the shelf, and I think, how in the world would somebody find my book if I had a book in here? And the way that happens in an independent bookstore is the people who work here know what they have. You go to the big chain bookstores, and they might as well be selling cornflakes. You know, they really don't know what they have for the most part. So the indies are the place to find what you want to read.
So can you talk a little bit about the distribution side then? So you've got a press. What's a typical print run for some of those early books, and then how do you get those books into the stores and into hands of readers?
Well, this is interesting. When I started this press, I didn't know anybody who had a lot of money they wanted to lose. So I started, and I still use Lightning Source. It's a print-on-demand company that's a division of Ingram Publishers, the largest book distributor in the world. So my books automatically get US and UK distribution as part of using their services for print-on-demand. I don't rely on bookstores just ordering the book. Because your book's sitting on a shelf somewhere doesn't mean somebody's going to buy it or find it. You've got to get people talking about it. You have to encourage people to share that with them. And the lucky thing is when you find somebody who loves a book, when they find a book they love, they talk about it. If they really enjoyed that book, they will talk about it, and they'll share it with somebody, they'll hand it off to somebody, which I don't recommend giving books to people to borrow, because that's how the best libraries are built. So the distribution side is we very heavily market on the internet. We hold readings at stores like this, the small independent stores, where the people who work there will get excited about a book or an author and will hand sell that book. So I would imagine somebody who comes into this store a lot, that the people who work here know that person and know what that person reads and knows what that person likes. So if you get somebody who comes in and they know that person's a poet or reads poetry or a short story writer or somebody who reads short stories, that they might reach over and grab a Press 53 book and say, "Have you read this yet? Do you know of this author?" So that's what we're counting on.
At the risk of putting you on the spot a little bit, where do you sell most of your books? Is it in independent bookstores? Is it at conventions? Is it online?
The bulk of our sales are from the authors themselves. I'm very particular about what I publish. It has to be something I love. But I'm also very careful when I choose the author I work with. I want an author who's out there. I want an author who is mixing it up, who's attending the conferences, who's doing the workshops, who's getting published in journals and magazines, someone who's constantly putting their name and their face out there. For example, we've got a couple of books on the table over there that we published recently. Mary Akers has a book called Women Up on Blocks. Mary has a blog. She's a writer, but she also blogs about books. If she reads a book and she likes it, she will blog about that book and invite that writer. Just send a note to that writer and say, "I just blogged about your book. Come take a look at it." And that writer, having huge egos like all writers, myself included, will tell everybody they know, "Hey, so-and-so just blogged about my book." Well, Mary has a blog that is constantly getting hits. So when we published Mary's book, now something I'll say about Mary's book, it's a fantastic collection of short stories. But the manuscript sat on my desk for a year. And it sat on my ear because I didn't like the original title of the book. And I thought it was kind of boring. And so every time I would look at my reading stack, which continues to grow, be like, okay, what am I going to read? And if it was a title that really grabbed me, I would grab it and read it. Well, finally I read Mary's short story collection and loved it, thought it was wonderful. So I contacted Mary and I said, are you really locked in on this title you've got for the collection? And she laughed and said, you know, Tom Lombardo, who happens to be my poetry editor now, who's someone who went to Queens with her, said, Mary, this is the wrong title. The title should be Women Up on Blocks, which I thought immediately was a great title. Well, when we put Mary's book out there, within a week, we sold 150 copies just on a pre-order basis because people knew who Mary was and they were familiar with some of her writing because she'd been published in different places. So that's one way to answer your very brief answer to your question.
Sure.
That we do to sell these books.
I think that's insightful, and I think for a lot of small presses, there's probably a similar answer to that, in that you are aware of who's at these conventions, at writers' conventions, who's kind of the movers and the shakers, if you will, in publishing, and you've got your finger on that pulse. And so, if a book comes to you from Ed Southern, for example, Ed's got a presence.
Right.
So I think it's an important a concept to be aware of as writers.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about how your background in the music industry, you mentioned the one thing where you were handing out CDs, but was there anything else that sort of prepared you working in the music industry for book publishing?
Oh yeah, in fact when I talk about writing, I'm constantly referring to the music industry. I think if writers and publishers want to see what's happening in the literary publishing world, look at what's happening in music. I know several of my friends who had the big deals, RCA and MCA and Capitol and all that, have begged out of their contracts or not re-upped their contract with these big labels to start their own labels, to book their own tours, to produce their own CDs. Because they don't have to sell as many and they can make a lot more money and they're in control. They're in control of that product. Never before in history have writers been able to control their futures as they do now. You don't have to wait for someone in New York City to bless you and say you are a writer. You no longer have to wait for that all coveted book review from one of the big reviewers that will make it in the newspapers. We, for our reviews, we send books out to bloggers, people who are blogging about books, people who are there with the readers, talking to readers who are reading what we're writing, what we're publishing. So you can go directly to those people now, which is what we do. We go directly to the reader and try to hang on to them, try to give them a reason to come back and visit the Press 53 website, to go to their independent bookstore and order the book.
Quick question, how many folks here are aspiring writers? So we've got a room full of writers. So what kind of work do you look for at Press 53?
What I like. I publish what I like. But here's what I like. I like stories. I like original voices. I like writing that is compelling as far as interesting, quirky, edgy, that doesn't toe that line, that's not a method, like method writing, things like that. I want something that's original, but yet that voice has to resonate with me. And believe me, I've passed on a lot of stuff that is really good. I know it's really good. But the fact is, when I publish a book, I've got to read it 3 or 4 times during the editing process and the layout process, and I don't want to be sick of it. I don't want to hate it. But there again, even then, and this is important for anybody to know, that for my small press, I have to make sure I've got an author who's out there, who's working hard, who's getting published in other places, If I have two manuscripts, and this happens all the time, I've got a manuscript here that the stories are really, really good, and this author's been published in a gazillion places, and they're teaching workshops here, and they've got a presence, and they're active and submitting, and they've got their own blog, they've got their own website, and I've got another manuscript here where they've been published a little bit, and they don't have a blog, they don't have a website, but the stories are just as good. Who am I going to work with? You know, I mean, and the practicalities of it is I'm one person. I don't have the power right now to make anybody's career. I don't have that Copper Canyon thing. If Copper Canyon publishes somebody's poetry manuscript, people all over this country are going to buy it because they want to know about that poet that Copper Canyon selected, because Copper Canyon is known as the place for poetry.
But you're getting there. Press 53 is definitely one of the more talked about small presses in the state, and you're getting
That's
there. True.
In fact, yeah, recently a book blogger in Seattle referred to us as that kick-ass press in North Carolina. So yeah, I'm proud of that. That's cool.
That is cool. So what is the best way for an author to submit work to you at Press 53?
Well, I have a little different approach to the submissions, and I'm working on this. I'm constantly refining it. Rather than having everybody to send me manuscripts that I have to work through, I like to build relationships. It's important. The couple of times that I've gotten into a situation where I've published a book that didn't do well is because I didn't know that writer well, and I didn't know what I was getting into, and the writer didn't know what he or she was getting into. So I suggest that writers drop me an email. I've got my name plastered all over the Press 53 website. You go to the submission page and it will tell you right up front that drop me an email, say hello, tell me who you are, keep in touch. If you get something published somewhere, send me the link, tell me who it was published with. If you want to make a photocopy of it or whatever, send me the story, send me the poem, and let's start building that relationship. And then over a period of time, when I have someone who's made an impression on me and I've read some of their work and I really enjoy it, then I will invite them to submit a manuscript to me. So it's almost like the boutique press where we don't have submissions, we just pick what we want out there, but yet the submissions are still open. I'm encouraging a dialogue, so that's basically the process. I want to build friendships.
Sure. Do you receive work from literary agents? Excuse me.
I do. Yeah, I have probably at least a couple times a month I'll get a query from a literary agent, and more times than not it's something I'm not really interested in. A lot of the agents are interested in pushing novels, which I'm not interested in, memoirs, which I'm not really interested in, unless it's someone I have a relationship with. For example, this next year we're publishing a novel by Valerie Neiman, who teaches at NC's A&T. And we published her poetry collection. It was the first poetry collection we ever published at Press 53. And she handed me her novel manuscript. And I'd read some of Valerie's short stories that she had published by a small press in West Virginia. University of West Virginia Press actually published that. So I'm a fan of her writing, and I know by working with Val that she's a hard worker. She's a great marketing person. She's doing workshops all the time. She's out there. She's constantly getting published, which is another thing. When she brings me her novel, it's not like that I have to do all the marketing for that. I mean, what Valerie does, because every time she gets published somewhere in her bio, it'll say she's got a novel, or she's working on a novel. So the marketing is built in somewhat in that regard. Plus, she's got a good following. But because I know it's going to be, it was a clean, very clean manuscript, and I love the story, wonderful writing, we took it on.
What can you tell us about the writing contest that you've had at Press 53?
That was born out of frustration. When Cheryl and I would have these conversations, and Cheryl left about a year ago. Her father passed away, and very tragically, and she wanted to get back to writing full time, and she's teaching part time now. So I think of her, I miss her all the time, but we'd have these conversations, and we were always frustrated because during the submission times we would be able to pick, okay, we're going to do 2 short story collections. And we'd have to turn away 5 or 6 that were really good by writers who were clearly deserved to be published. And all we could do is say, well, I'm sorry, but we have to pass on your work, but best of luck to you. And we thought there's got to be a way to publish more of these writers, so we thought of this contest. And we thought of doing a contest that was multi-layered, where we had poetry, but it wasn't just, submit your poem, but submit 3 poems that are judged as a group. So if you've got 1 great poem and 2 that are so-so, you probably won't win. And we have judges that are outside Press 53. It's all a blind read. So we get industry professionals within the industry to judge this. We have flash fiction, which is becoming very, very popular. Stories up to 750 words. The short story up to 1,500 words. The short story, creative nonfiction, and novella. So there are 6 categories in this contest, which allows us to publish a lot more writers. And what I've done this year, what I did last year, is we published the top 3 in each category. And we got submissions from 33, I think it was 33 different states and 8 foreign countries. And our judges, to give you an idea, we've got Zinta Asters, who is the editor-in-chief of The Smoking Poet out of Michigan. It's a top-notch poetry journal. We have Tara Massey, who just edited the Rose Medal Press Field Guide to Writing Flash Fiction, is our flash fiction judge. Let me see, Lise Funderburg, who's a regular contributor at O Magazine, is doing the creative nonfiction this year. So we go out and we find people who are really active in the industry and doing things and ask them to judge, and they get these manuscripts that are no names on them, just numbers. So that's based totally on the writing.
How about, you and I had met at the SEBA trade show, which is a great conference for booksellers and small presses and publishers. What other kinds of conferences would you recommend, Kevin, for writers to be going to? Which ones should be on our radars that we should go to? Of course, there's the North Carolina Writers Network Fall Conference coming up.
Right, that's coming up next weekend at Wrightsville Beach, and I would highly recommend that. It's a great place to meet a wide variety of writers who are published, agents, editors, publishers, professionals within the industry, to really sit down and share ideas with them and to ask questions. The one thing that I tell people all the time is that the internet has made it has torn down so many walls. Writers and editors and publishers are so approachable these days. They're just regular folk. Very approachable. Book festivals are another great place. Every year for the past 4 years I've gone to the literary festival, the Carolina Mountain Literary Festival in Burnsville. I highly recommend this. It's the second weekend of every September. It's free, and they've got the most creative use of workshops and speakers and panels and discussions going on. And these people are walking around just milling about, and it's a great time to meet people who are doing different things in the industry and asking them questions that could help you.
I'm going to pass around an attendance sheet or sign-in sheet. Well, not attendance sheet. I'm not in class, although it feels a little bit like it. If you want to sign in your name and email address, I can let you know about upcoming events that we have. So, do we have any questions from the audience? Go ahead.
How did you come up with the name?
53 is my lucky number. It was interesting, my brother who is here, when I was maybe 8 or 9, came in, we shared a bedroom, almost through high school. It was amazing. It was fun, wasn't it? Yeah. And I just happened to ask him one day if he had a lucky number, and he said 7. And I thought, well, that's my lucky number. And I thought, well, we can have the same lucky number, So I was almost offended by this. And I tried to talk him out of, you can't have the same number. And he's, oh, that's my lucky number. So I thought, well, I need to find a new lucky number. So I sat down and went through this whole process of, you know, 1, that looks boring. It's just, you know, 2, yeah, then, you know. Then I thought, well, if it's just a single digit, there are probably millions of people out there. If it's 8, I mean, millions of people. So I thought, wow, I need to increase, you know. So I started putting numbers together. And my favorite football players were the middle linebackers, because I always wanted to be a middle linebacker. But I was like, when I graduated high school, I was 6 foot tall and weighed 137 pounds. So, you know, I couldn't even be a wide receiver. I mean, I was a toothpick. So, but I settled on 53, and then since then it's followed me. Herbie the Love Bug, you know, came out in '69. A couple of years later, 53, there it was. Nashville, I lived right off exit 53. All the big tractor trailers you see going down the highway usually have a 53 on the side because the bed's 53 feet long. I'm telling you, I started something.
You haven't lived with this number a while, have you?
Yeah, and it's been very lucky for me. So.
Tell us a little bit about the Surreal South anthology.
Oh, this was great. Pinckney Benedict and Laura Benedict, a couple of wonderful, wonderful writers who Pinckney teaches at the University of Southern Illinois in Carbondale. He also teaches at the MFA program at Queens University in Charlotte. And because he knew Cheryl from that program, he was keeping an eye on what we were doing with the press. And he approached us with this idea and said, you know, we're thinking about putting together this collection of weird, odd, strange, genre-bending kind of stories, sci-fi, gothic, whatever goes. Would you be interested in publishing that? Well, this isn't what we publish. You know, if somebody brought to me and said, I've got this sci-fi collection or a sci-fi novel or sci-fi this, whatever, it's like, well, I don't do that. But what hit me was, well, it's an anthology, number one, of stories. And the first volume had poetry in it as well. So I thought, well, you know, that'd be kind of fun, actually, to put something like that out if we came out around Halloween with that every year. And then Pinckney and Laura were like, well, we don't want to do it every year. You know, that'd be too much, but we could do it every other year. And then we realized that the first volume came out in 2007, which was an odd year. So I thought, well, Surreal South every odd year, that kind of makes sense. It's kind of apropos. So we just come out with our second volume. And it's odd. I mean, it's really, beware when you pick that up. The cover art I found, which is something else we do, I use original cover art. I don't use any clip art or any stock photography on the covers. I go out and find art. And I found this photograph on Flickr.com where photographers from all over the world post their stuff. And take a look at the cover. We've got a book over there. It's scary. It really is. It's odd. And you know, and the crows figure into the two covers. And I think we're going to stay with that theme, that there's going to have to be a crow on the cover of each of those books somewhere on that.
Question here. Go ahead.
Does your poetry editor, I think you mentioned his name, Tom Lombardo, does he respond to all submissions, or do you respond to them, and just how long does it take?
Well, that's a good question, because Tom came on board in January as poetry editor, and we try to get back in a very timely fashion. Tom got slammed this year with poetry submissions and had hundreds to go through. And what we do is we ask, send us 10 poems. They usually submit them to Press 53, and then I forward them to Tom. And just last week I saw him at Queens, actually, for the faculty or the alumni reading, and asked him how it was going. And he said, man, I'm so far behind. So he's working hard on that. We try to get back in a timely fashion, but I encourage Tom to get back directly with the poet, because he's the one making the decisions. I'm not making any decisions in poetry right now.
And that's the time when you invite or you don't invite?
Well, it would be if he likes the 10. If he likes the 10 and it resonates with him, Because Cheryl and I chose the first few poetry collections that we published based on the fact that we're storytellers. We're both short story, but I've had some poetry published. I enjoy writing poetry, but I don't consider myself a nuts and bolts poet. And I think Tom has that reputation, and a very good reputation in that regard. So I let Tom deal with that, and I'm very happy to do it because when it comes to helping a poet organize that collection in a way that seems to fit and make sense, I'm not very good at that. I'm very good at that with short story collections, I think. But poetry, I want to leave that up to somebody who is a poet, and Tom, I think, is a really good one.
Sounds like one of the major strengths of Press 53 is that you've been able to find good collaborators and editors to work with. Can you talk about how that process is working? How did you meet Pinckney and Laura and some of these other folks that you've worked with?
Well, I can blame John Ely for a lot of this. John, if you don't know John, is a national treasure. He lives in Winston. He taught in Chapel Hill for years. He was born and raised in Asheville, so he's covered the whole state. But right after we got started with the press, we had a big coming out party at the local bookstore in Winston, and 200 people showed up. And one of those people was on the board for the libraries on the same page, which is the big community read program they have every year. And a week later, someone from the library contacted me and said, we want to celebrate John Ely. We want to put we want to do one of his books for the community read, but the book he would like to do is out of print. Would you be interested in putting this book back into print? And I didn't know who John Ely was. I had no clue who this guy was. And so I'm asking, well, how do you spell that? I'm sitting on my computer on the phone, and I'm typing in his name, and I start reading his bio that was on the North Carolina Writers Network website, and I'm thinking, holy cow, how come I've never heard of this guy? He's written 17 books. He's considered by a lot of people to be the father of Appalachian literature. He's the first writer to be considered to write about blacks and Appalachians without stereotype. He was the idea man for Governor Terry Sanford behind such great institutions as the North Carolina School of the Arts. The first ever governor's school in the country was at Salem College in the 60s, and it's now in 40 states. The School of Math and Science was his idea. The Film Commission was his idea. The guy's a national treasure. The Lyndon Baines Johnson created the first ever Humanities Council, National Humanities Council, from an idea he got from John Ely when he asked him, what can we do as a nation? And then he asked John, would you like to serve? And John said, well, I can't, but maybe my friend Harper Lee would like to do it. So how come I've never heard of this guy? So we meet John, and we talk about bringing the Landbreakers back into print, which if you've never read the Landbreakers, he wrote a 7-book collection about the settling of the Appalachian Mountains, the first settlers, European settlers, to settle the Appalachian Mountains. And it was a 7-book series and runs from the 1779 all the way up to the Depression, the Great Depression. Wonderful series. In fact, just this last week, or a couple weeks ago, I got a call from Jan Karen. You all know Jan Karen? Yeah. Calling me saying, I just read The Landbreakers again, and I think this is the most important book ever written about the Appalachia area. Everybody should read this book. And we talked for 20 minutes about John Ely and how much he loved him. I get letters and emails all the time from people who are rediscovering his work or find it for the first time and are amazed. So when we met John, and we're a couple of kids who started this little publishing company, and we show him some of our books, and we show him our contract, and we're talking to him, and he chooses us over 5 or 6 other publishers who are thinking about republishing the Landbreakers. And I think it's because John likes a good adventure, and I think that's what he saw in what we were doing. But over lunch one day, I just mentioned to John, I said, the only reason we're even thinking about doing this, John, publishing this Landbreakers, is because I think it's as good as To Kill a Mockingbird. Thinking I'd be funny and cute and the whole bit. Well, John didn't laugh. John he looks up and he goes, I used to know Harper Lee about 100 damn years ago. And Cheryl, not knowing any better, said, well, do you think we could get her to write a blurb for the new edition? Yeah, that's what I did. I laughed. And he reaches in, pulls out his address book, takes the rubber band off of it, and he goes, well, here's her phone number if you want to give her a call. You know? So Cheryl calls the phone number, and Harper Lee answers the phone. And they talk for 20 minutes about John Ely and how much she loves John Ely, and I'd be glad to write a blurb for you. Tell John I said hi, I love John, you know. And then I'm thinking, and Cheryl's telling me this, I should have written down that phone number. And then when we got the handwritten letter from Harper Lee, when it came to me, and it came in the mail, and I'm looking at the envelope, and I open it up and start reading, it says, Dear Cheryl. You know. But then it got picked up. I think the Greensboro newspaper and the Winston newspaper and the Raleigh newspaper and every other newspaper around the country kind of picked up on this story that here's this little bitty press that gets a letter from Harper Lee. And then we were in the radar. We started, so I think Pinckney picked up on that and saw we were doing things. But he also saw that we were doing things we loved, that we were not trying to go after a particular market, but we were doing what we love. Publishing work that we love. And he saw passion there, and he thought, that's a good home for what I want to do. I want to have some people working with me who have that kind of passion and drive.
Got a question over
That
here.
was a long answer, wasn't it?
It was a great answer, though. I love the story behind that.
Well, thank you.